So, welcome everybody to this week's webcast on the Farm Bill's influence on forests and wildlife and water, and happy Juneteenth. So, I'm Casey Kula, you can tell in my name, and I coordinate forest policy at Oregon Wild. And tonight I'm joined by Congresswoman Andrea Salinas to talk about the Farm Bill. Now, the Farm Bill can prop up harmful forest practices, or it can support forest health and clean our drinking water and take action to slow climate change. It also does a lot of other things, and we'll hear from the Congresswoman about that. The Congresswoman has had a role in shaping it, and I know that she's fighting to change it as well. And so we'll learn tonight a little bit how you can influence the Farm Bill to make Oregon and across the United States stronger and healthier. And then I'll talk a little bit about work that we're doing here at Oregon Wild to protect drinking watersheds, and then we'll go into Q&A. And you can put your questions in the Q&A at any time. That's in the bottom kind of toolbar for the Zoom. We usually get a flood of questions right at the end of the presentation. So if you get them in sooner, then I'll be able to ask them sooner. So I'll ask questions of the Congresswoman. Now, a recording of the program will be emailed out shortly. I can't promise it'll be tomorrow because I'm going to Walava County tomorrow, and it'll be posted on our website. And we have a lot of new people joining. So a quick introduction to Oregon Wild is that we're a statewide conservation organization that for the past 50 years has focused on safeguarding Oregon's wild lands, wildlife, ancient forests, and waterways. And we rely upon passionate people like you to do the work that we do, whether it's advocating for those wild and scenic rivers or the other, defending old growth forests, or being a voice for native wildlife. And if you want to know more about our work, visit OregonWild.org. And before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that we are in lands that are stolen by force from the original people of this place that we call Oregon, and whose descendants comprise the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon, as well as tribes in neighboring states, and indigenous people who are not members of tribes, federally recognized or not recognized. And that includes our public lands, but also our cities and our farms and our ranches and our homes and our businesses. They're all located on unceded lands that were never given to us by the original caretakers. But those original caretakers, in many ways, and very truly, are still here with us. And then land acknowledgement doesn't right historic wrongs, but it can be the start of further conversations. And it's also a reminder of this very special place that we live in. So with that, I'm honored to introduce Congresswoman Andrea Salinas tonight. Congresswoman Salinas is the proud daughter of a Mexican immigrant, a first-generation American, and a dedicated public servant working for the people of Oregon's 6th Congressional District, which I am so proud to be a member of or a resident in. Her father immigrated to the United States as a child and picked cotton and tomatoes in the fields of the Rio Grande Valley before eventually going on to serve as a police officer. Her family's story is an American story where hard work can provide a path to a better life. As a first-generation college student, Andrea decided to pursue a path of public service after graduation and worked as a congressional aide and a policy advisor to Senator Harry Reid and Congressman Pete Stark. And then later, Congresswoman Salinas worked in the communities of Yamhill County and Willamette Valley while serving as an aide for Congresswoman Darlene Hooley. So she has a lot of experience in Congress. And after her work with Congresswoman Hooley concluded, Andrea went on to serve as an advocate for labor unions, environmental groups, and reproductive rights organizations in Oregon. And in 2017, she was appointed to the Oregon House of Representatives and served through the end of her term in 2022. In the House of Representatives, she served as the House Majority Whip and was the chair of the House Healthcare Committee. She was elected to Congress in 2022 in one of the most expensive primaries in American history. And Andrea is proud to serve on the House Agriculture and House Science, Space, and Technology Committees, where she crafts policies that will help level the playing field for Oregon farmers and rural communities and create good paying union jobs. And we're so honored to have you with us here on Juneteenth, Congresswoman. So I want to have you take it away. The floor is yours to tell us about the Farm Bill and other efforts that you're working on.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Casey. It's always so good to be with you, even over Zoom. Your positive energy is yeah, really very present. And I want to say thank you to Karina Martinez, too, who is helping out tonight. So very pleased to be here with the Oregon Wild team. So honestly, one of the great joys of my time so far in Congress has been serving on the House Agriculture Committee. And I think for folks who have attended any of my town halls, especially at the beginning of my service last year in 2023, I tried really hard to get on the Ag Committee. There are a number of my freshman Democratic members who also serve in what I would consider like a purple district that has a bit of urban, rural, and suburban. So the idea to serve on the House Agriculture Committee at a time when we were doing the Farm Bill reauthorization was highly coveted. So yeah, so as a first-term member, I really wanted to bring the voices of the Willamette Valley and Oregon's 6th District to Washington, D.C. And so being on the Ag Committee really has presented that opportunity. And as you know, Casey mentioned, the Farm Bill comes around, it gets reauthorized about every 5 years. And it's supposed to, there are 12 programs and it's supposed to cover our agriculture and nutrition programs. So as you can imagine, it covers quite a bit. And in fact, this year's Farm Bill, when we went to the committee markup, the bill was almost 1,000 pages long. And that didn't even include all the supporting reports and documents. So I will try to give a quick overview of where the Farm Bill stands in the process and get into kind of what, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And then we can get into more specifics. But as Casey mentioned, it is supposed to be a must-pass piece of legislation. It gets reauthorized every 5 years, and just like our spending packages, it needs to be passed. Because of the Senate's 60 vote threshold, as well as some internal House dynamics, the Farm Bill simply cannot pass without a broad bipartisan coalition of support. The Republican House Agriculture Committee chair, for those of you who don't know him, his name is Glenn Thompson, or he goes by GT for short, but he made an effort to include a substantial number of bipartisan and Democratic priorities in the bill in order to entice Democrats to support his proposal. But there were some major problems with it. GT's bill included some pretty big spending increases for America's biggest commodity crops like corn, soy, cotton. And to pass for these massive increases, to be able to offset them, GT decided to raid the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, implementing a $30 billion cut that essentially would lead to recipients losing up to 2 days of benefits per month. And that's a red line for me, right? We grow things here in Oregon, but we also need to be able to feed people who need it. And so, and I continue to say, giving me a false choice is not acceptable. So GT also attempted to limit the Secretary of Agriculture's ability to respond to disasters and last minute crises, and engage in innovative climate smart investments through the Commodity Credit Corporation. This was another area that got cut in the bill. And then finally, and this was another big one for me, another red line, GT wanted to remove climate requirements that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act for conservation programs. And essentially, the Inflation Reduction Act, this was a monumental bill that really sought to address bringing down our greenhouse gases and addressing climate in the United States. But it included additional money for agricultural conservation programs to the tune of about $20 billion. It included requirements that grant recipients from these programs implement climate smart practices in their agricultural and grow operations. So these programs are entirely voluntary, and conservation funding without these climate specific requirements was still available for farmers who didn't feel their operations were ready to take on new climate smart practices. But, and I think many of you on here probably know, but these climate smart practices included things like utilizing cover crops, transitioning to clean energy sources. I know a lot of my nurseries have used a program to help them bring solar onto their operations so that they can reduce their energy costs, improve soil health techniques to sequester greenhouse gas emissions, and lots of other things just like that. The only problem with the programs is that they're oversubscribed and growers are actually hungry for more of this funding. So GT essentially wanted to remove these requirements entirely and repurpose the money set forth in the Inflation Reduction Act. And that was, that was a bill that was passed in the 2017 Congress, really with Democrats leading it. And that was entirely unacceptable to me, right? We are not going to be able to continue to grow things here in Oregon if we don't address the climate issue. And I told him before the markup, I went with about 3 other of my Democratic colleagues to a closed door meeting the evening before the markup. And I respectfully asked the committee chair to come back to the table and negotiate on those 3 provisions. I'm not a person who is either yes or no. It's not, like I said, I reject false choices. Sadly, we got no for an answer. So he felt like he had the votes to get the bill out of committee and for it to pass on the floor. And I'll get to more of that at the end. So for all of these reasons, as well as some other serious concerns I had about the bill, and I'll go into those in a minute, I voted no on the Farm Bill Committee markup last month. And unfortunately, several of my Democratic colleagues ended up voting yes on the bill. There were about 4 of them. They did so due to having large constituencies who rely on the economic benefits of some of those big commodity crops that I mentioned, like corn and soy. But they still expressed serious concerns over GT's overall proposal. And most of them have expressed that they would not vote for the bill on the House floor and that the bill would have to be significantly changed in order for it to have any chance of moving forward. And so he believes, and we have 2 processes pretty much that we can go through when we bring a bill to the floor. You can go through the regular Rules Committee where amendments are brought forward and the Rules Committee decides whether they're germane and whether they can go to the floor and be amended, because we can amend on the floor in Congress. Or they have what they call suspension, and you suspend the rules, so you don't have to go through the Rules Committee, but you need 2/3 vote. And right now, I don't think GT is going to be able to get a rule out of the Rules Committee because that intractable Freedom Caucus, his extreme members, are so difficult to work with. We actually haven't passed any big packages through the regular channels of the Rules Committee. So I suspect he's going to need Democratic help when we bring that bill to the floor. So that's an overview of the Farm Bill as it currently stands. And with all large legislative packages, there will be good with bad. So let me take a second just to go over a few of the positive provisions I really worked on to see included in the text, as well as some other elements that I had concerns with. So the Farm Bill did include a couple of pieces of different bills that I had put forward. So the Civilian Conservation Center Enhancement Act is a good example. The CCC, Civilian Conservation Centers, and we have a few of them here in Oregon, are run by Job Corps, and they provide specialized training for professions in wildland management, including wildland firefighting. And as people know, Oregon has, in the West, the entire West has problems with, climate disasters and wildfires. And unfortunately, for too long, the U.S. Forest Service has had difficulties hiring graduates of these civilian conservation centers due to essentially just bureaucratic red tape and federal hiring requirements. So my bill sought to remove that red tape and allows the Forest Service to hire directly from these CCCs. So that will significantly address our wildland firefighting personnel shortages that we're seeing and improve the Forest Service's ability to respond to fire emergencies. The one piece of my bill that didn't get included was the increase in pay to attract more folks to this kind of work. Another one of my bills, the Timber Innovation for Building Rural Communities Act. This included a requirement that the Department of Agriculture work with state foresters, tribes, local governments, and private sector entities to establish a platform for measuring, monitoring, verifying, and reporting data about the carbon impacts of forest management practices and the production of wood products. And we know for too long here in Oregon, we're always pointing fingers. We're always pointing to different reports and different science. This would actually just set a baseline for what we are all measuring and how we need to measure it. So I'm happy to share that the carbon data platform and the Forest Service Direct Hiring Authority pieces did make it into the House Farm Bill. And they actually have a pretty strong chance of being included in whatever the final Farm Bill ends up looking like. The Farm Bill did include, though, some environmentally positive provisions as well. It includes an emphasis on traditional forest management practices like prescribed burns, which is something I've heard from a wide variety of stakeholders about, and in particular, our tribal stakeholders. And while the bill does remove the climate specific pieces from the Inflation Reduction Act, the conservation funding, as I just mentioned, it does also increase baseline conservation funding and would significantly increase the number of acres included in what we call the Conservation Reserve Program, which takes land in environmentally unique and critical areas and removes them from agricultural production, basically safeguarding those environments and those lands for generations to come. So, like I said, it's a mixed bag. Unfortunately, the bill simultaneously makes some massive expansions to categorical exclusions, which essentially allows for a wide variety of forest projects to completely ignore environmental review requirements and the Endangered Species Act. It also includes what Republicans call a cottonwood fix, and cottonwood, for those who don't know, refers to a court decision that held if new information is discovered about an endangered species in an area in which a federal forest project is taking place, the environmental review for that project must be revised to include that new information and how the project would impact the endangered species. Well, this new farm bill essentially eliminates the revision requirement, meaning that new information about the endangered species could completely be ignored. So further, the bill makes significant restrictions to the deployment of solar power on farmland, essentially restricting farmers who want to maybe convert their private land to solar power generation from doing so. And we have our own land use laws here in Oregon that would or would not, it's not entirely clear how it would impact them here. But taken as a whole, this bill is not an acceptable product. And obviously, compromises always have to be made to get things across the finish line. And I am the first to acknowledge that. And it's important that we all realize we are not going to get every single thing we want. But I believe that we can do better than what the House Agricultural Committee passed last month. In fact, I know this because we do have another chamber. Senator Stabenow, the chairwoman of the Senate Agricultural Committee, she put forth a competing farm bill proposal, at least the outline, but it's a pretty substantial outline. It's over 100 pages that I think is a far better product. And it serves as a true example of how we can prioritize the needs of farmers, nutrition program participants, rural communities, and environmental stewardship all at the same time. It has to be a balance, though. So I won't go into details on what the Senate proposal looks like right now, but suffice it to say, it is a far better product. So GT and Chairwoman Stabenow, as well as my fellow committee members, we will all have to come together and back to the table over the summer to come up with a proposal that can really garner bipartisan support. It'll have to be probably somewhere between both proposals that are currently on the table. And as I think Casey might have mentioned, the current farm bill is set to expire on September 30th. We were actually supposed to reauthorize it last year, and we did a 1-year extension. So if we can't get it done by September 30th of this year, we will have to pass another short-term extension. And realistically, we likely will not see a final farm bill passed and signed into law until after the November election. We're running out of time. And folks will understand exactly what everyone's political leverage will look like in the next Congress as well. I am kind of upset with that kind of diagnosis or prognosis, I should say, but I think it's true because I actually think right now is our best shot at getting the best possible outcome for the Farm Bill. So I don't like that it works that way, but it's the reality of the politics that we're dealing with right now. So I will wrap up my Farm Bill spiel right here, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversations and questions that people might have.
Yay, thank you. I like to think that I'm tracking this and it was so helpful just to have you lay it all out. And it also gives me a lot of hope because I was really pretty bummed watching and listening to the House version get passed out of committee. So I really appreciate that. Um, and I apologize. I didn't see the question in the chat that came in right at the very beginning during the intros. But Karina Martinez is a forest policy intern here at Oregon Wild, and she's going to be asking the first question. So actually, to that end, I was, well, I promised you I would talk a little bit about forested drinking watersheds here in Oregon, and I did want to highlight a little bit of that in that here in Oregon, and this Congresswoman Salinas knows this because she's well versed in what happens in Oregon forests. But I did want to note for you that uh, the latest science is that industrial forest practices like clear cutting and extensive use of herbicides and that uniform replanting of one species of conifers actually increases winter flood flows and decreases summer low flows, which amplify the effects of climate change, which really are forecast to do the same thing, reduce summer low flows even lower and increase winter high floods. And what that means is that drinking water systems across our forests, from the Coast Range to the Blue Mountains, have bigger floods that make for dirty, hard to clean water in the winter, and parched streams and water shortages in the summer, including in the 6th congressional district. I could list them all, but actually, Congresswoman Salinas knows a lot of these communities already. But I wanted to note that there is hope because what we've seen is that older, more diverse forests with bigger trees reduce that harm from both climate change and industrial forest practices. And we can do something about it. And at Oregon Wild, we're helping with that effort, including encouraging beaver reintroduction, reducing herbicide use in forested spaces, planting more different kinds of plants, and growing older trees. And we know that that works to reduce that summer deficit and it cuts the peak off of those winter flows. And so between the Farm Bill and the Oregon legislature, I think it's actually a moment in time to really help get that done with the programs that hopefully the Senate will keep in place, those funding sources, and that you'll be able to find a compromise on. So I did want to note one other thing is that here in Oregon Wild, we understand that those public forests can be a powerful force for slowing climate change or reversing it just by growing, just by being forests. And if you haven't checked it out, Oregon Wild has a whole campaign called the Climate Forest Campaign, and you can go to OregonWild.org and read all about it. So with that, let's get to questions. And the first one comes from Karina Martinez. So Karina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome.
Um, Hi, Congresswoman Salinas. I'm Karina Martinez. I'm a forest policy intern at Oregon Wild. I'm studying biology currently, so I'm kind of just trying to get the idea of policy making within that department as well. So my question is pretty much just with like your priorities on the Farm Bill, what like particularly in terms of helping local farmers, what is more important, like to you to help farmers or to aid climate change?
Oh, that's a great question, Karina. And I always say it's both. We can do both, right? And our growers in Oregon recognize the need to actually address climate, right? Because if we are not addressing climate, we're not going to be able to grow anything. And they're seeing it. They're seeing it in some of the devastation around wildfires, how those affect crops, heat domes, droughts, ice storms, some cold snaps in April, May, and June, all of these things really affect our crops. So we have to do both. And which is why I keep saying this has to be about balance. And in Oregon, we have more specialty crops than we do like some of these big commodity crops that got a real disproportionate share, I will mention, in the Farm Bill. So those corn, soy, and cotton, they're part of the Farm Bill, and their revenues that they will be getting from the Farm Bill are a lot bigger than some of my specialty crops. And so it just has to be about balance, right? How do we protect some of our, smaller acreage farms, things that, where we do grapes, hazelnuts, Christmas trees here, right? How do we protect some of those and provide some of the crop insurance and disaster assistance that frequently we're not able to access? So I think it is not, again, not a false choice. It's not about, picking a priority. It's about doing both at the same time. And I wish people would, and I do think Oregonians and Oregon growers understand that. And yeah, and I just wish people across the United States would continue to repeat that because I think most growers know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think those both go like hand in hand too. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So questions from the chat. We have one from Lorna Tori Palermo. asking about the farm bill and adding the Senate version would add and equines to this portion of the bill that's the SAFE Act. And it sounds like Congresswoman, you are a co-signer to the SAFE Act. This person is Lorna is asking, will you support the change to the farm bill that would halt the slaughter of horses or equines for human consumption?
Yeah, absolutely. That feels easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that question, Lorna. The next question is from Beth Stebbins. And I think that they mean that we in America are growing corn for ethanol, but maybe they are themselves. I actually don't grow corn for ethanol, but I have some very nice corn plants out there. I've heard that farmland, using farmland for soil panels yields more net energy than ethanol. And is that idea reflected anywhere in the Farm Bill? And that's a great question, Beth.
That is a great question, and I don't have the Farm Bill in front of me, but I would be happy to circle back. I don't remember that coming up in our discussions, and I don't remember that that actually being any of the points that were made to me in terms of like good things, bad things. But I do think we have to think outside the box, and we do have to think about what, and Congressman Blumenauer actually has a pretty good bill about, we have to think about doing the Farm Bill differently, actually. And what are we trying to achieve with it, right? And so, and that kind of approach and that kind of idea could be painful, right? If what we're trying to achieve is, CO2 reductions, and at the same time, so Secretary Vilsack says all the time, about 89% of the benefits of the Farm Bill go to about 7% of the crops across America, right? Very slim margin. So the other 93% of crops and growers and production get the remaining, what, 13%, 12, 13% of the Farm Bill. So I feel like some of us are fighting over the scraps and other people are getting a disproportionately large share. And we need to bring that back into balance. But obviously bringing that back into balance is going to cause a lot of heartburn, right? Because this has been an historic bill. It's had the nutrition programs along with the, commodity crops and all the other agricultural pieces since the 70s, which is why the nutrition pieces were brought in to make it more bipartisan. So, so if that is the case, and if growing corn is actually, or if solar on farms is actually a better way to, and more effective and efficient way to produce energy, then we're gonna have to, intellectually, academically address that and figure out what we do next.
And probably politically too, right?
Yeah.
I,
Well, there's always that big one. I
right.
always like to start with the policy, but
I am no expert on this, but my understanding that part of the value of farmland in some of these communities in the Corn Belt is because it continues to be a market for the corn, right? That
right,
it really is based upon your ability to produce corn.
right.
Yeah. And in our community, we have, as you know, Congresswoman Salinas has alluded to multiple times, there's such a wide range of crops that are grown in Oregon. And probably partly because of that, it's really hard to have benefits go to a lot of these diversified farms, right? Or just small scale, I guess, right?
Exactly. Both. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us a sense of you had a little bit of a teaser about what some of the details were in the Senate version. What are some things that you are excited about in the Senate version that you really hope or are going to fight for? Um, and then what are the things that you anticipate that we'll need to fight for? Right? Because it is like
Thank you.
you can only do so
Yeah.
much.
That's right. Yes. So thank you. So I actually have, I think it's an amazing bill, and I've been working with our rural jurisdictions, our local rural city councilors and mayors to find out more so what do our rural communities need, and where have we been lacking? And what we know is that a lot of our rural communities have infrastructure needs. And so whether it's, their sewage systems, clean drinking water, roads and transportation, and housing, right? So all of it though, but you can't get the housing unless you have a sewage system that's up and running and working, that doesn't need to be addressed every few months, clean water drinking systems that can provide for additional residents in the community. And the problem right now that's facing our rural communities is that, like Portland or like Salem, the cost to stand up any of these costly infrastructure designs is just as expensive as it is in our cities, right? It's just as expensive in say Portland as it would be in Carlton. However, the ratepayers are so much fewer, right? We just don't have as many ratepayers to spread that cost across. So this has been something that I've been hearing from all of my rural communities, that they need help with infrastructure, and they don't. And the federal government provides quite a bit of help, actually, but our communities are so small that it's usually like one mayor who does everything, right? They wear 11 hats, or maybe one city manager or an attorney if they're lucky. And then that same person also wears a bunch of different hats. And some of these grants and funding programs out of the federal government are really, they're Byzantine and complex, and nobody knows how to find them or where to go for them. And so while my office has been, fortunate enough to deliver some what we call community funded projects or community project funding directly to the jurisdictions, we need something that can help our local jurisdictions to figure out, how do you layer maybe an EPA grant with a US Department of Agriculture grant? How do you braid it to leverage the most bang for your buck? And so I came up with a bill that would do just that. It was called the Rural Partners in Prosperity Act. It would be through the US Department of Agriculture Rural Development Department, and it would force agencies to essentially put some point people on the ground to help rural communities directly, and to be that point person to help them access grants and funding. Yeah, and then it would basically help them figure out too, like, is there, because a lot of times, so for instance, Carlton's sewage system ended up dumping water into the local river, right? And now they're getting dinged by EPA. It's not like they want to address it. They can't afford to address it, right? And every day that goes by. And so this would provide that technical assistance as well for some of our communities to be like, oh my gosh, when a crisis hits, how do we address it? How can we partner with our federal government and not so it doesn't feel so punitive and like they're having to compete or get drowned out. And so I want our communities to succeed. And right now they're truly set up, they're not set up for success under federal government programs. So my Rural Partners and Prosperity Act would do just that. And it's included in Senator Stabeno's bill. Like, yes, and we have so much support for it. And so many of my Democratic colleagues really liked it, and they wanted it in the House bill. There was no way. It's going to cost money. And that's where there's a fight between Democrats and Republicans. I keep saying, I think we need to spend money, even if it's deficit spending right now. We're not completely out of COVID, but I think if we can get to a place where we become more successful with our businesses and our operations in the Willamette Valley, and lift people up and start to turn the corner on climate, we're going to see that come back to us in federal revenue, and then we start to buy down the deficit.
Nice. And maybe I'll come back to how can we help. We have a question, a fairly interesting question here. Okay, as a plant person, I think it's interesting. And that's from Mark and Alice Imlay, who are in Maryland. So welcome. I can't believe you're still awake. And this is speaking of specialty crops. How about plants that are native? For example, here in Maryland, we can buy Native American persimmon, which, by the way, tastes better than imported persimmons, is the side note. Way down yonder, the pawpaw is also another native plant, right? Which is a native fruit that tastes better than most fruits on the market. That's from Mark. I mean, I prefer our amazing raspberries, but I'll say that they're pretty good. So by careful marketing of pawpaw, we can help preserve some threatened forests. So I think really the question to you, Congresswoman, is what's the role of the Farm Bill in promoting some of these native plants that are also food, whether they're indigenous and native to North America, or are part of like deep cultural traditions?
Absolutely. These are some of the pieces in those conservation programs that we're trying to promote, right? Because we know that native species, we don't, invasive species harm, harm our ecosystems, our habitat, and so many other things. So no, those are exactly the kind of pieces that those conservation programs are set up to do, is to promote what is local and what is native. And so that's why when we start to think about actually removing the requirements around the Inflation Reduction Act, I feel like it's going backwards, and it's just taking a step backwards. We want to promote those types of programs, and and our native plants and species.
Awesome. And thank you for that great question, which I think I butchered a little bit, but um, I appreciate it anyway from Maryland. William Dalton has a question, and feel free to answer in however delicate way you want. But are you finding it possible to work with your House colleague from House District 5, Congressional District 5? And uh, that's Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer, I believe. But I think it goes to a bigger question of how are you working with your colleagues here in Oregon, the congressional delegation, and then from across the country, even those who aren't in your caucus?
Yeah, so and that is a great question, and thank you for that question, Billy. So almost all of the bills that I've introduced, I have tried to go out, and whether they're farm bills or other, mental health, or um, Medicaid, Medicare. I've tried to find Republican co-sponsors because I do think it is so important that we reach across the aisle and make sure that we're talking to different folks. So I actually have a bill that addresses mental health for farming, fishing, and forestry industry. So really a rural health, mental health bill that the chair of the Rural Health Caucus, Congresswoman Harshbarger, she's a co-sponsor of that bill. And so, and there have been a number of different bills that Congresswoman Chavez DeRemer and I have co-signed onto each other's. Um, I think probably the one area that we can both agree on is that our specialty crops need the crop insurance changes, and that specifically address, and there is a provision in there that brings together a type of task force to start looking at specialty crop insurance a little bit more, and to bring people from specialty crop production to the table. It's not as much as I would have liked to have seen, but again, I think there are some things that Senator Stabenow is working on that also could move the dial a little bit. But that feels like it's a big one. I think we both recognize that, and and I think some of the wood products stuff, especially on because again, industry came together with, I think, our conservation communities and said, hey, we can do this baseline, try to get a metric for carbon sequestration, and what does that look like? And so, so things like that, I think we've been pretty good on, where we can meet in the middle. The nutrition stuff, I think, we didn't agree on that. And then I think removing the Inflation Reduction Act conservation sideboards, we also didn't agree on. But it's Don Bacon from Nebraska. I've been a co-sponsor with him on a number of different bills. I think one of our bills will address imports of cockfighting, or roosters essentially, for cockfighting. We both signed on to that just to eliminate that, and some other things. So I've been I always say it doesn't matter who comes up with the idea. A good idea is a good idea.
Yeah, that's helpful. It probably feels with some of those bills where you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I get to work with you, right? Like there's an
Yeah,
opportunity.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I will say that I really appreciate the details on the requirement, or the look at carbon accounting for forest practices. It's definitely an area. Just this morning, I had a conversation with somebody from Weyerhaeuser, and we were like, we're not gonna talk about carbon accounting today, even though we're talking and writing about climate change. We're just gonna stay away from that because we just can't find agreement.
That's right, exactly. And that part, sometimes, I think people don't realize that it takes a lot. It can take a lot of time to get to the next step, which is, how do we address it, right? Because if you don't start off with that, and that's the baseline, right? You need a baseline to figure out, are we really reaching our goals?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Um, the in the Senate side, is the money restored, or is the money in there to bump up the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Program? was one detail I wrote down to ask you about.
It is actually, yeah. So in Senator Stabeno's outline, she does not cut SNAP benefits, and from what I understand, Majority Leader Schumer has essentially asked for about a $6 billion pay for that would help with the farm bill. So some of these things that she adds that will add some fun, some costs to the bill. And so, but they have a plan for, like I said, like a $5 to $6 billion pay for.
And I think I understand what you mean, but maybe other people, maybe everybody here understands. But a pay for, that's where you find money somewhere else. It's a revenue source
That's
that
right.
balances it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, perfect. You mentioned prescribed fire, but I missed some of the details on it. What exactly in the farm bill that are, I guess, since there's two competing farm bills right now, in the Senate, in the
The one that
Stabeno
we
one,
passed though.
right, right. Once you pass it, what kind of work do you think it's going to be, or what kind of benefits are you going to have? Do you anticipate for prescribed burning specifically? And mostly, I
So
ask that
I
because
think,
it's like
so
it's a statewide thing now, right?
I know. So essentially, the U.S. Fire Marshal came out with a very comprehensive and big report on how we address wildfires throughout the United States, right? And it's multifaceted, and you all know this. You've been working. I mean, you were working with me in the legislature and Pam Marsh and others for you guys have been working on this for decades, right? So this is not new to any of you, but essentially so is it hardening homes? Is it, it's thinning, not clear cutting? I mean, they put this all in the report. How do you work with the tribal members to look at more traditional prescribed burns and those sorts of things? So it is really kind of looking at everything. And I believe, and I don't know the exact details of the provisions in the House passed Ag Committee bill, but it will allow for some of those tribal members to start again nationwide under certain conditions to figure out and work with their local jurisdictions to do prescribed burns essentially.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. My deep dive this week was into the National Prescribed Fire Act that Senator Wyden introduced, I think late last week.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
but
okay.
but I realized that's not the farm bill, right? That's another whole bill.
It is, but you know what, Casey, a lot of times, because I've introduced a lot of bills and a lot of times they'll put the bill or pieces of that bill into the farm bill. So yeah, so it would not surprise me if he pulled part of even one of the farm bills out and yeah, came up with his own package.
Nice. Okay, that gives me a little bit of hope. I was like, we've got the farm bill, it's got prescribed burning in it. You've talked about that, and yet here's another
Yeah.
critically important piece that feels like
Avenue.
right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And
They
another
should
vehicle
mesh.
that we can talk about too. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, totally. One thing I wanted to ask you about, moving a little bit further afield, but still back into Oregon, that's not necessarily Farm Bill related, is around wild and scenic rivers. The Senator Wyden has reintroduced the River Democracy Act, and I wanted to get your take on it, since I know that there's at least a few streams in your congressional district that would be introduced as wild and scenic rivers.
Oh my gosh, I would be so excited for that. As you know, yes, no, this is right up my alley. And I don't know that my staff I think I asked them to see if we have a House companion bill or if Senator Wyden wants a companion on the House side. It's always nice yeah, to share the workload and to make sure we're ready and that it's been communicated to my colleagues, on the importance. So once it comes over, but yes, I will definitely be supporting that.
Awesome. I will. Well, I've taken Fritz, your state director, out to at least one of the sites, but I'll be sure to make sure he knows how to get you there at least.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yes. So what I wanted to ask, as we get closer to the end here, a lot of the folks who are with us today, a lot of folks who registered and are going to watch it later, the recording, is what can Oregon Wild supporters, folks from Maryland, what can they do that's most effective on the Farm Bill? And it sounds like I will just say personally and organizationally on the Senate version, to get the strongest farm bill for, for climate practices. Personally, and I think professionally here, we'll say the best deal for SNAP benefits, and really the best deal for forests. Like, what can we do to help you?
I would say, I mean, even, the bill hasn't gone, it hasn't been brought to the floor yet. So I would just say, right? So presumably, like I think I mentioned, there are two paths. It could either get, put under a suspension rule, in which case there would be no amendments, or it could go through the rules committee, in which case there could be amendments. So I would just write to your, members of Congress and your senators and just let them know that you want the Senate and the House to hold strong to put the conservation requirement, the climate requirements, and the conservation requirements back into the Inflation Reduction Act provisions, and that you don't want any cuts to SNAP, essentially, because it's not a done deal. It's not a done deal on the House side. I keep saying that it's not, and I will again. I'm bummed that because I do think we have the best people in the House and the Senate right now. I know that sounds funny to some people, but we really do. I think we do. And we have the best chances right now of the way the House is balanced. And I do think GT Thompson, his heart is in the right place. I think he has some extreme members of his conference who want to take the bill into a more extreme direction. So I would just let your members of Congress know that you're watching, you're following this bill, that it's not, it hasn't come to the floor yet, and that changes can be made on the House side, and that, and then same thing from the Senate, that you don't want to see, any changes.
Awesome. That's super helpful. It's helpful to have some language and a direct, like, here's what we can do, and here are the folks that we should talk about it with. I did
Yeah.
want to, for the audience, I did want to plug that probably the most impressive congressional thing I've ever seen is Congresswoman Salinas, and I think her staff did a lot of work on this as well, is putting together a full day of roundtable conversations with folks from around Oregon, around the district, and around the region, specific to the Farm Bill. And we do have a few minutes, so I'm going to like take a little bit of your time. Can you talk about what you learned from that? Because at least for me, I was blown away. Just like straight up blown away by how many people you got there and how you got them to talk kind of freely about their issues in a respectful way.
And I think you were there for the forestry one, certainly, yeah, which was a difficult one. I think we had one on specialty crops, and we certainly had one on nutrition. I think I had four, but you're right. They were big, big roundtables with probably about 40 to 50 people each time, and not necessarily all singing from the same choir page. So as Casey said, it was some really good discussions around, for instance, what happened on the private forest accords, and hearing from folks who maybe weren't as involved with those, and how, how it felt like it might, impact their practices. But then also, what do we need to move forward, right? What can discussions look like? And so what I took from all of this is that there is middle ground, and that we can reach that middle ground. But I don't think often enough that different advocates hear from each other, right? I feel like so often, and I know you did this through the private forest accords, you had to, right? You had to listen to what the other side was saying. You had to figure out, how do we get to yes? And it almost forces you, when you have these roundtables, to start listening to the other side and hearing, like, okay, how are we going to get to yes? Which is why I felt like I had a shot the night before the markup to go back to my chairman and say, hey, can we take one more shot at this? I would be willing to negotiate, but I can't just be given a take it or leave it proposition. So I'm always happy to have those conversations. Yeah, and it felt like, I think people understood. I think, the other side, I will say, I think industry got to hear how much some of these conservation programs are used, and how much they're oversubscribed. And that's what I keep coming back to, is that we can't curtail these programs. Again, Secretary Vilsack does these listening sessions as well. We've had I think he came out twice. I've heard from him twice, and he's heard from so many constituents. But these are different ways, especially these conservation programs, that farming operations can actually increase their revenue, decrease their energy prices, decrease some of their inputs, their fertilizer costs, so many things that cost them. And it's supposed to work out so that you have a net revenue from this, right? And I think that's what the Farm Bill should be about, is to help us get at that dual objective, right? How do we keep farmland in farming, and how do we make sure that our planet still exists tomorrow? And I know we can do both. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's a lot of what I
hallelujah.
heard from those discussions.
Right, right. Oh, that's so good. I live a split life too, and so there's a lot of time when moving pipe to think about that. How how do we lower prices, right? Because that it's that's
Right.
the one thing that, you know, the Congress, for example, can work on, and I really appreciate it that when it's something that also benefits the rest of us too.
That's right.
Hooray.
It's a win-win.
Yeah,
Yes.
there is one last question. I apologize. I just saw it, and I think it's really around can Carol ask, can I get more detail about the carbon accounting provisions for timber industry practices? And that may not be quite what you said, but please, it is an interesting area and one that's going to be really important here in Oregon.
Yeah, so I don't want to mess up on the details if you really want specific details. And again, I don't have the bill in front of me. So if I can, Casey, get you the link to the provision in the bill, we can pull that out. My staff and I can pull that out. And I don't know if you can like add it to this video at the end or whatever, but yeah, or send it out to your folks.
That's perfect. I will send it out as a little highlight on a follow-up email that I'll send to
Perfect.
everybody. Yeah, and then the folks who are watching who didn't get to
Awesome.
ask the question will have it too. Well,
Exactly.
we have reached the end of the hour, and I really thank the folks for great questions for joining us today. Thank you, Karina, for asking your question. It's so exciting to have Karina with us. Yes, so thank you for that. Thank you, Congresswoman. Do you have any closing thoughts for us? I've really taken to heart and had a lot of hope in hearing what you have to say. Any more hopeful thoughts for us?
I just want folks to know, especially, I've, and Secretary Vilsack has said this too. I think for a while it felt like, and I put this on Democrats, that Democrats were walking away from our farmers and agriculture. And that is not the case in the 6th Congressional District of Oregon. I hope people know that I'm leaning into it. I want to make sure that we are thriving and growing. I mean, Senator Wyden says it all the time. The thing that we do best is we grow things here. And I want to make sure we do that for centuries to come. And so, yeah, so for my part, I'm going to continue to listen to folks in the district and in the region and across Oregon and make sure that our interests are heard in whatever farm bill makes it out of Congress. So thank you. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Thank you, audience. Have a great evening and enjoy the beautiful weather out there. See ya.
Enjoy the sunshine.